under the age of 35 have died. Another 973 have died who were between the ages of 35 and 45. So about 1,500 people under the age of 45. Everybody else in that 84,000 number is above the age of 45. I think public policy is eventually going to have to get to that. I now am joined by Lieutenant General David Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Lieutenant General Deptula, welcome back. Good to talk to you. Before I turn to the military question, I'm just curious what you think as a public policy guy and as a military manager, that number about age tells us about managing this virus.
Well, Hugh, I think it's extremely insightful in the context of. Let me start with the fact that the measures that were taken in terms of self-quarantine, if you will, were appropriate when we didn't know a whole lot about COVID-19. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't adapt as we garner more and more information. The statistic that you indicate is an illustrative one, and one that indicates that perhaps the initial steps can be adjusted and should be adjusted to accommodate for the reality of the age groups that COVID-19 actually affects. Put in more plain language, it's time for kids to go back to school, and we need to take a much more adjusted, targeted, focused, and intelligent approach toward a response to COVID-19.
You know, one of the things I think about, for example, I think you're an Air Force Academy grad, right, General?
No, actually, I went to Mr. Jefferson's University, the University
Oh, did
of
you?
Virginia.
Oh,
Sure.
so you didn't have any college sports. That's too bad.
Well, our football team back in the early 70s was entertainment. We all went to watch the band, but UVA's done quite well for themselves in the sports world now.
My friend Fred Barnes goes down and watch every Cavalier basketball game. But it would mean, for example, the Air Force Academy, when they have the plebes come, or the midshipmen for plebe summer at the Naval Academy or the West Point Cadets,
Right.
They could all come and do their summer, I think, in relative safety. I think that if universities adjust to the profile of who is dealing with whom and make age discrimination a feature, not a bug, for a period of time, we'd increase the safety profile and reopen up American higher education.
Well, I think that's just what the Air Force Academy is planning on doing. They're planning on bringing the next entering class in here in the not-too-distant future. But you raise an excellent point. We've got to, with the new information and data, we now have to start to adjust some of the very dramatic measures that were taken initially.
Yeah, a fighter pilot is someone who absorbs a lot of information and adjusts where they're going as a result of that. The mission changes. Now, I want to ask you specifically about an air war that is going on in the skies of Syria that I've been following. It's not a big headline maker, even though it's a life or death breaker for a lot of people in these planes that the IDF is sending over there. What is the Israeli Air Force attempting to accomplish, General, with F-15? And can you actually degrade the Iranian missile capacity via the air with limited strikes like this?
Well, sure you can. I mean, the Israeli Air Force has been doing an excellent job. And as you mentioned, it is an air operation that's been conducted quietly behind the scenes, if you will, except for those who are trying to import Iranian missiles into the hands of the Hezbollah and the actors who would put Israel at risk. And when I say, yeah, of course they have, is the Israelis have an excellent intelligence network. They know when the Iranians are continuing to move missiles into Syria and Lebanon. And so they interdict those movements with selective airstrikes from their very capable Air Force.
Now, Syria is a pretty big place, right? It's not a small little country, and so there are a lot of places where Hezbollah or Iran could be It's about 1/50th the size of the United States, so it's not huge, but it's still
No,
how
New
in the world.
Jersey, if you put it in context, about the
Okay,
size of New Jersey.
so how do you figure out? I know we have targeteers in the United States, and we have a vast collection capacity and satellites and all that, and I assume Israel's got the same thing. But it's awfully hard to find factories underground, isn't it?
No, not really, because what you do is you look for indicators. You don't have to necessarily. And it's those. Let me do it this way. There are indicators that allow one to draw conclusions in terms of where missiles, for example, are being stored. So, using those indicators, the Israeli Air Force identifies with a high degree of probability a particular location or site where missiles might be stored, and then they go in and find elements, generally human sources, that can positively verify what's going on before they make a decision to strike or not.
And do they have enough capacity to actually stop a country as intent on malevolence as Iran from standing up a missile capacity without killing lots of civilians? Because we know what Hezbollah does. They hide them in basements.
Yeah, the Israelis have made it quite clear that if in the event Hezbollah and the Iranians who are behind them initiate attack against Israel, that the missile locations will be targeted. That is something that's extraordinarily important that you raise. Is that just because missiles are hidden in a location that has civilians doesn't protect those missiles from being struck. It is the entity that is putting civilians at risk that are liable for their well-being, that being Hezbollah. So just because they are going to hide them there doesn't mean that they're invulnerable to attack, nor are they unstrikable in accordance with the laws of international armed conflict. Israel would be fully justified and supported by the laws of international armed conflict to attack those missiles wherever they're located.
All right, General, I want to go halfway around the world and ask you a question I asked Admiral Stavridis on Monday, and which I'll be asking Mike Gallagher in 2 seconds. We know we are in a quiet Cold War with China. Taiwan is our ally in a way that it hadn't been for 50 years. Should we sell them F-35s?
To Taiwan?
Yeah.
I kind of chuckle because I've talked about this for many, many years. It would be strategically dislocating to the Chinese, particularly the B variant. That's the vertical takeoff and landing variant of the F-35. Because it's one thing to be able to, with a vast number of missiles that the Chinese have, to hit runways, but you can't affect all the different takeoff locations or landing locations if you have a vertical takeoff aircraft like the F-35B. So it's certainly something that the United States should consider as one of the elements in its effort or strategy to deal with China. And it's one that needs to be considered and entertained. And the mainland Chinese People's Republic of China needs to think about the consequences of their actions that might cause the United States to take such action.
Now, the CCP
directly affect their ability to continue to dominate the region.
Yeah, we got 1 minute, General. We are at the lowest ebb of relations with the CCP in 50 years. So is it a good time to sell F-35s or the worst time to sell F-35s at a moment like this?
Well, what I was trying to allude to is it is an element that needs to be brought into the discussion space as a piece of our not negotiations, but dealing with China. I think one of the pieces that people need to understand is that although it's not as easily observed or understood as a physical warfare, the effects of the information warfare campaign that the Chinese are executing are equally devastating. So the United States has got to close this gap in our counter-information warfare campaigns, and using the F-35 as an element of that campaign is certainly something that needs to be incorporated.
General Deptula, always good talking to you. Thank you, General. Follow him on Twitter at Deptula_Dave. And I'll be right back. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.